Morning, Borg. It's the following day. We're hoping to go and do more on our study in the wood. As forecast, it's overcast. It's the opposite weather to yesterday, but it's meant to clear up, or at least stop raining. It's raining very lightly, so possibly we'll go out and finish it, but we'll have to wait. I've parked up here again in light of the possibility of war breaking out at this moment. But I'm not going to talk about that. I'm just going to leave you with that image, and instead I'm going to talk about the Impressionists, Borg, because having read, over Christmas, John Rewald's History of Impressionism, I've got a renewed interest, a bit more knowledge. I mean, I still follow more Van Gogh and Cézanne, the post-impressionists, really for the same reason that they wanted to move past impressionism, to enough with the light and the weather conditions. It would be nice to do that, really. I mean, a lot of people do that. Plein air painting, what an industry it is, Borg. It seems the only rival industry might be pornography, but everyone's at it, and they all tend to be aiming for an impressionistic, swift rendering of the natural scene in front of them, which in a way we are as well, but not relying on shadows and light so much, but on the autonomous colour and balance of shapes, maybe some movement and rhythm through the planes rather than a sort of 3D rendering. Anyway, the reason this book was good, though, Borg, is because it showed you just what they were up against. Incredible stiffness of the academic salon, and they went against it, of course, and really pushed through some awful criticism. But the thing that amazed me is the sheer scale of painting going on in Paris. I mean, the salon could have like 6,000 paintings in, and thousands of visitors every day for months. It really was the main, it would seem, one of the main entertainments. And in that context, oh dear Lord, that's the telephone, Borg. I'm going to have to answer that. I'll be back on in a minute. Forgive me, Borg, that was important business regarding my daughter's birthday party. And the question of making cake pops instead of a regular cake. But the Impressionists, extraordinary, really. The system of the academic salon was so authoritarian, you wouldn't believe it. And even though you look at the pictures of a master of that sort and you think, blimey, that is an amazing painting, it was actually quite a narrow set of sort of aesthetic procedures were allowed before they would cast you to hell. And the Impressionists, of course, went so far the other way. Even today, I mean, I often think how rough the real painters were, And today it would shock people how rough they are, especially because the painters now have landed for some reason on a kind of smooth photographic rendering trick scheme of tricks. So they'd be shocking now to that lot. But it was very interesting to see how this man wrote about their struggles every year, submitting to ritual slaughter by the critics and public, and they just kept going. You know, quite demented in a way. Hello? Seems I forgot to hang up there, Borg, and the call was still going, but you know. She knows that I do talk to you, Borg, and she's aware of the reasons, otherwise, you know, she'd think I'd gone mad. Anyway, it taught us a lot about Van Gogh and Cézanne, basically, to learn more about what they were sort of going against. And not only that, the writer, he dealt with it very well, I thought. He didn't say a lot himself. He managed to talk through the letters of the artists. And that's all very good. But it made me think overall this morning, since we're sitting here in front of some sort of Scud missile with war about to break out and everyone gone insane, that perhaps a little review mightn't go amiss. And when I was thinking of it, I've tried to do these sorts of things before, Borg, with the Tor Point Art Service, for example. I suggested the idea of a banner that might tell the story somehow of modernism in pictures, you know, a little montage. But it's, of course, you choose what, you know, everyone would have a different one, I suppose. And I started mine at Cézanne. If I remember rightly, it was started at Cézanne and Van Gogh was in there. And then it went into sort of, I think Malevich was there, and then avant-garde, madness, futurists, Duchamp, Society of the Spectacle, you know, situationism. So we chose a radical art type route rather than, you know, we weren't talking about Matisse and Picasso now, because we're more interested in the radical art route. But it occurred to me we should have perhaps started with before Cézanne. You know, it's fair, even though he is talked of for different reasons as being the, you know, the father of modernism. He wouldn't have been able to do it without the previous. But then again, he was, you know, knackers deep in the original Impressionist exhibitions. He just buggered off, didn't he, for 10 years or more, and seemed to come back and wow everybody with his apples after, you know, after Impressionism had maybe had its moment. Anyway, but I think it's if a review would need some proper thought, but something definitely strange has changed in the last 10, 15 years. Because let's say we go from conceptual art, and the way we sort of divvied it up before is that kind of would blend a little bit into institutional critique. which is it's a bit different. It's not just a critique of the art object, it's the context, the context around it, which is very political, and to this day it's the whole shooting match, really. And then I suppose when people would talk about a postmodern phase, it's that identity politics, the idea of mixing and bending genres, but the critical thrust of that might have been an identity politics. Borg, you'd have to work it out, wouldn't you? But yeah, after that, we tuned in to critical art a little bit at the time of the late 90s, because we went to university, Borg, and they want you to look and think very hard, so we did. In the late 90s, anti-globalization, activist and art combining in carnival-like protests against the powers that be, and in the context of anti-capitalism and globalization. And I believe in our Tor Point art montage, it was represented by the Seattle riots. And then after that, we looked to the Copenhagen Free University, and a little second look at institutional critique, a follow-on in the context of the knowledge economy, and in that whole era, that in the 2000s, let's say, the great changes in structure, I think, of institutions sort of opening out, and a sort of mixing of that sort of idea overlapping with the telecommunications technology, Borg, the internet, the dot-com boom and the phones. We were kind of had to be taught or encouraged to behave differently and imagine the world as all open. And likewise, art, people would, no longer really see a barrier between the art gallery walls and the public space, and it all went on like that. And a lot of it, from the critical angle, you had increasing attention on critiquing capitalism, I think it's fair to say. Naively or not, or sophisticatedly, that was in the air. And once again, the way it was done was the thought of collective art practice and building and organising in a collective fashion against capitalism, and also at the same time pointing out that similar encouragements to behave collectively and a social turn, as they say, you could see encouraged by by business, and in the world of corporations and business. So the two mirrored each other, Borg, and it chortled along in relational aesthetics and the institutional critique period, which you could call it self-institution, and a bit later mock-institutional works, Borg. And all of it is aimed by the artists, the dark matter artists, and the humanities professors and social theorists, and real activists, political activists, are all aimed by those people, me included, at capitalism. Now, what happened then? We had a bit of Occupy, Borg, in relation to the financial crisis. And then, well, first of all, the financial crisis happened years before, and I suppose that helped to really shine the spotlight on capitalism, at least the behaviour of the banks and how it's all going to shit. And then, but that, it's funny, that did happen years before, but it seemed to really wind people up when the solution to it was that, the austerity and a bit of a completely ignoring of the financial industry and what it had done. Because of that, it really kicked off and ended up in Occupy, didn't it, Borg, with the tents. And overall, that was that 10 years leading up to Occupy was our own personal, we experienced that. Before that, with the institutional critique and the postmodern identity politics themes, we didn't experience that. That's in the books for us. What happened after Occupy? Because that's a big deal for a dark matterer. If you were there, if you'd watched it, it's a very big deal. But afterwards, didn't continue. We could witness very cleverly the way the Tory party and other political parties and the system itself would just adapt and twist, and suddenly anyone fighting austerity was naive, either naive or a communist, and they successfully doubled down, as they say, on the austerity, and then won great success at elections, Borg, democratic elections, leaving the likes of us wondering what the fuck now. But that wasn't the real story, Borg. The real story is of a new group, a new type of group. Would they call it a political body? I don't know. Was emerging and fighting back, it would seem, against not capitalism, not really cheering for capitalism either, not cheering for the financial industry, but aiming their criticism at the likes of people that would critical of capitalism over the previous years. What we've come to know is the cathedral. Good Lord, Borg, we've gone into it now, haven't we? But all we wanted to say is that it's very interesting just to go from Occupy to now and to see how this other politics that's aimed at the snowflakes, the humanities, anybody with a real passion to think of how society works and believe that it's important, and to want fairness and equality, these things would come under great attack. And it's so confusing. But to study that would be very interesting, Borg, and of course that then, what would you say, it sort of combined with a sort of second burst of technological innovation with the data industry to help things really get nasty, but also to help people with the power to be able to manipulate things as they wish a lot more. And then you got Brexit and Trump, and on we go. We, shortly after Occupy, seeing the dismay of British situation, how austerity politics seemed to be suddenly a very popular thing, and seeing how maybe it was twisted and turned to make it such, we gave up on that angle, believing a break was necessary, and we found the Tor Point Art Service. It was the right thing for us, and we went along that route, and we're still going now. We've carried on that route. I mean, we started painting as a joke, as a protest. Now we can't stop, because it's become us. We want to do it for itself, but we have continued along these self-institutional roads. And that needs a lot of thought, Borg. I mean, is it the way? We're not pretending. We do acknowledge what's happening, that we make ourselves a frame. It's the phone again, Borg. Probably just as well. Well, Borg, that was the hospital. No panic. They wanted to reschedule an appointment for my mother. For her, and there's a tingling sensation in her left hand. Anyway, I checked, Borg, and we've now been going on for 20 minutes. There's no let-up in the bad weather, so I don't think we're going to get out today. So I suppose we'll finish off our little wandering potted history, and then we'll get off. But the point, we felt it necessary to draw a big history like this, Borg, or we do, periodically, to help ourselves. For two reasons, really. One, can we still claim, is it productive, is it wise, good for us and work to claim some critical potential in plein air painting? And we think yes, still, because of the logic of our work. Is it could be anything. It could be carving wooden spoons, and it depends how you tie a frame around it, how you dress it up, Borg, which is a very simple way to say it. But that takes us to the second question. Is this concept of ours, this idea that anything can have this sort of critical potential, even if it's just for yourself, to be able to resist a little bit pressures and stay sane and productive? Is there potential in the idea of creating these framing stories around whatever it is we do? I mean, we found the Tor Point Art Service. We briefly found, or thought we found, the Stockholm Art Service, and then the Dignity Scholarship. And then we use those, we make those our framing. So what we've got to ask ourselves also, Borg, is that any sort of innovation? Because in part we took that idea from what Van Gogh did anyway, which was write a load of letters in a diary form as he was going. So that's all it is in a way. But it's more how we then understand him and his letter writing today, 100 years after. We've got all the paintings and all the letters, and they come together, as one. And that wouldn't have been the case. He wouldn't have been thinking that. He's just writing a diary. So we artificially create this oneness between the framing and the work. And we felt and do feel that is still a goer. And one question is always, can it be extended beyond the individual to a collective process? We've never tried it because, frankly, it's not our personality, Borg. We're a bit of a loner, but I do think it would be very interesting to try and do it. But you can kind of see how that's happened on the alt-right anyway, or it happens today, where people together, over the internet really, will institute certain ideas and themes, even knowing that it's not really real. The alt-right particularly will deliberately choose some story or other and promote it together, consciously, strategically, to wind everyone up. But anyway, Borg, we've got to ask ourselves more about this, and perhaps admit that because we've fallen in love with the red, yellow and blue, Borg, and we can't give that up, are we now just, is our idea that there's a kind of political angle to it, is it now just a sort of shell? Because we just want to carry on the painting. If we were really a radical spirit, would we not just give up that and then do something completely new for the times, I don't know what counts, what is the stream, the vein of radical art today, beyond where we left Yeats McKee and his post-Occupy condition. I wonder what else there is. In Bowers, our idea, Borg, has merged into the times with the idea that, in a sense, everyone's gone mad. No one knows what's real, what's true. Some people do know that what they're shouting about is false, and their aim is to stir confusion. So in that context, we have twisted our thinking into the idea of needing to have something tied to the ground, something that ties you to where you are, while at the same time you can enter into the madness of the post-truth context, but without being lost in it. The line tied tight to the here and now, as we said. And then, of course, you've got to ask, well, what do you think is your here and now? What's your line tied to? Well, ours is tied to where we live, where we are physically. For want of anything else to tie to, it's just where we are. And how do we do that, Borg? Well, plein air painting is a good way to do that. You are absolutely reliant on what's in front of you and observing it carefully. So in our entire history there, Borg, we still see ourselves not, gone to seed in the artistic sense just yet. I think I might be a little bold in suggesting it, but I still think there might be some potential in what we're doing. But there's also an equal chance, Borg, that if it was ever exhibited and anyone paid any attention, it would receive some of the treatment the Impressionists received from the salon. That would be our suspicion. The inverse salon of today, of critical contemporary art, might well take us for a dauber, But it would seem that an exhibition of our work is about as likely, as what? It's about as likely as that missile taking off right now and landing on little Vlad's head. It's just not going to happen. And with that out the way, Borg, I would like to think that is out the way. We can get back to talking about you. You've had your hand in all this, but I want to talk in the more fun science fiction-y sense about you, Borg. That was the idea, and we'll get back to that. I think we'll be back on Monday to carry on that picture in similar conditions, hopefully. So until then, I'll say cheerio. Have a nice weekend.